Do the trashy pulp novels of the world have anything to offer? Are bestsellers all they're cracked up to be? Here at Terrible Book Club, we explore whether you really can judge a book by its cover, or its ridiculous synopsis. You ever passed a book and thought, ugh, who's reading this? We probably are.
Hello and welcome to episode 219 of the Terrible Book Club. I'm Paris, and this is Mary.
What up?
You may remember Mary from such episodes as this past October's The Phantom of Manhattan, Die Hamletmachine, or our now beloved E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial in his Adventure on Earth episode.
I'm so sorry.
I know. Chris was called away on a years-long shipping voyage by a conniving relative, so he can't be with us today. Unfortunately. This time, Mary and I read The Memoirs of Fanny Hill by John Cleland, originally published in 1748, because Mary has talked about this on and off for the last couple of years, and I don't know, we just figured it'd be a fun one for the show since I don't think we've ever touched 18th century erotica on TBC, so why not now?
I mean, as far as I know, this is pretty much the only English language 18th century erotica, at least of the time it was published. There was a lot of French erotica, and there was earlier centuries erotica, like Chaucer. But by the 18th century, they were pretty repressed, so they weren't churning out a lot of steamy romances.
Yeah, and I feel like, speaking of the French, I feel like de Sade, coming like around 50 years after this, really sort of took over the whole erotica landscape in terms of like.
A lot of English people read French, so they didn't really, the people who were interested in, high profile pornography, they just read it in the French. And I'm guessing, I am not a historian. Go ahead and fact check me, any historians who are listening. But I do know that this work was partially inspired by a really popular French erotic story of the time. I think it was called Venus in the Cloister or something like that. I can't remember the French name. But
Venus in Furs? Is that
it wasn't
maybe?
Venus in Furs.
No?
That was a different one. But it was basically a very raunchy, sort of similar story. And John and his buddy, who both worked for the East India Company and were stationed in Bombay.
Yes. Who didn't? The Amazon of the 18th century.
Right? I mean, well, it's like you didn't have Amazon Prime back in the day. You didn't have Disney Plus, so you had to make your own fun on long, hot, Bombay evenings. So why not write some erotic fiction with your, quote, very good friend?
Yes.
And they wanted to challenge themselves, he said later, to write an erotic story without using any foul language.
Ah, well then. Wow.
That's why there's so many penis metaphors in this story.
I mean, it's the same thing with de Sade. I guess de Sade's my only comparison because I've read a lot of him. And yeah, it's like everything's a pike staff, everything's I don't know, all kinds of things, which we'll hear.
So hot.
Oh yes. Battering rams. Great.
Nothing gets a woman hornier than that kind of language. Absolutely. Anyway. By all means, continue.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary, for giving us a little bit more context there. And I presume you will continue to do this throughout the episode because
you know it.
I know. All right. If this is your first time listening to this show, what we do here at the Terrible Book Club is we read books that we assume will be bad based on their cover, title, summary, or some combination of the three. And sometimes, like today, we read books that our patrons, listeners, or friends, such as Mary, recommend. So we do the opposite of what most people are doing, when they're in a bookstore or browsing the internet. And typically this experiment produces hilarious and disappointing results. But once in a while, we do actually end up liking or even loving the book. It is a rarity, but it is so fun when that happens.
I don't think that's going to happen this time. I'm sorry.
No, I don't think so. In addition to our usual, barnyard language, hey, we've got barnyard language on the show, so lots of swearing, and that's pretty normal. But in addition to that, today's episode is going to include, oh boy, a lot of graphic sex and unfortunately sexual assault. So gird your loins, block your ears, listen to another episode. If this isn't for you, that's fine. But we are going to be reading pornography to you from the 18th century and all that entails. So, all right, Mary, why don't you give us a little bit of the sort of the back of the book summary? Like, what's the tagline in 2025 for this book from 1748? How are they pulling people in?
You got it. And I'm going to say Cleland because that's how I say it in my brain. I've actually never heard it pronounced aloud, so I'm interested that you say Cleland. I have no idea which one is right. But I'm going to say Cleland because that's just how it is in my brain.
Mary, this is wonderful. Chris isn't here today because he's off on his shipping voyage. And we always have pronunciation fights. So this is great that we are also organically having a pronunciation fight today.
Absolutely. Oh, this is just
classic
mild disagreement.
All right, great. Cleland, go.
John Cleland's Memoirs of Fanny Hill stands as a seminal work in the realm of erotic literature, intricately weaving the tale of a young woman's sexual awakening in 18th century England, written in a rich... Okay, that sentence actually doesn't have an ending, so Amazon, I'm already docking you points for this summary. This is a poorly written summary, but whatever. Written in a rich, colloquial style that combines both wit and detail, Cleland employs a mostly first-person narrative that immerses readers in Fanny's provocative experiences. The book transcends mere titillation. No, it does not. Exploring themes of desire, morality, and the complexities of sexual agency within the social constraints of the era. Moreover, its publication in 1748 positioned it provocatively against a backdrop of growing debates around sexuality and censorship, marking it as both revolutionary and contentious in its literary context. As a contemporary of other notable authors, Cleland's views were reflective of and responsive to the shifting moral landscapes of his time, offering a critical lens into societal norms surrounding women and sexuality. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, this summary is really stroking it.
Terrible summary. Memoirs of Fanny Hill is not merely a provocative tale, but a profound exploration of human experience, no it isn't, and a societal expectation. For readers seeking to delve into an essential work that challenges the conventions of its time and engages with enduring discussions about sexuality and identity, Cleland's masterpiece remains a crucial text deserving of exploration and reflection. That I agree with. I would say, though, that these deeper meanings they're finding are not the intention of the author. That was not what he was trying to accomplish.
Yeah,
I do think they're there only because it's interesting in a historical context, but he was certainly not trying to make some deep work exploring women's sexuality, which is something that I have a suspicion that he knew nothing about. We will get into that.
Yeah. I also challenge the idea that this is an essential work. I don't know. I mean, if you are maybe a connoisseur of erotic literature or a scholar, sure.
A scholar, yeah. It's an essential work if you're a scholar because, like I said, it's basically the first piece of originally English language published erotica ever. Yeah. So that is of itself.
That's a big deal.
Is a big deal. And the fact that a certain scene that we will get into seems to be subtly promoting homosexuality is also very telling. But of course, in a way that he has the merest gauzy layer of, oh, it's totally bad. He covers himself, but not in a very good way.
It's like those gauzy bags you get gifts in. You can see right through them, but it's technically a fabric.
Technically I've wrapped your gift.
Technically I've wrapped this sex scene.
I'll just say, I'll hold this up so Paris can see. I have my own actual physical copy of Fanny Hill here.
Oh, nice.
I think I picked this up somewhere for free, and that's how I even heard about this book. I got it in a little free library or something. So this has a much better summary on the back. It's very short. It just says, Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, commonly known as Fanny Hill, has been shrouded in mystery and controversy since John Cleland completed it in 1749. The Bishop of London called the work an open insult upon the religion and good manners, and James Boswell referred to it as a most licentious and inflaming book. I think that's a much more accurate summary of what this book is and its place in canon.
Yeah, I agree. Well, great. We have two different perspectives already, in addition to both of our perspectives. So
what? Penguin Publishing is better at summarizing books than Amazon? Shocking. Shocked about that. Anyway.
Wow. I think that was actually from Google Books, but yeah, I mean, at this point, Google and Amazon are sort of, in my mind, merging into like one umbrella corporation.
Fair.
All right. Our characters and settings. So, of course, we have our titular heroine, Miss Fanny Hill, a young sex worker. We've got Mrs. Brown, a conniving madam. Mrs. Cole, a much nicer and cooler madam. A sordid sex worker. You don't need to know their names. Charles, Fanny's one true love, and all of this is happening in England sometime in either, I don't know, the 1730s or 1740s. I mean, considering it was like published in the late 1740s, you'd think he probably set this in the last decade.
Yeah, but he probably wrote it, most of the bulk of it, when he was working in Bombay, which was at least a decade earlier. So it doesn't really matter. I don't think things changed very much in that decade. Yeah,
1720s, 1730s. Yeah, okay.
Somewhere around there. Yeah.
All right, so I am going to read my longer summary of the tale, even though Mary has read this probably multiple times and is familiar with it. You readers have not, and typically we've been doing this so that the other person can react to it, but Chris, alas, is not here today. So that's okay. We can enjoy the tale together. The book is, I don't know, it's supposed to be an epistolary novel, but it doesn't feel that way because there's only two quote-unquote... Yeah, there's only two quote-unquote letters, letter the first and letter the second, so it is broken up into two. But again, this is also as gauzy as the bag that's covering the gay sex scene. It's like, I don't know.
Well, interestingly, the novel, even as a form, was still kind of in its infancy in this time. So it's not like they had come up with a blueprint for writing novels with like dialogue and the sort of standard tropes that we think of today. It was still very much in the early stages.
Yeah, that's a fair point. All right. Letter the first. Fanny Hill is a Liverpudlian 15-year-old with little education, even less common sense, and fewer street smarts. She is suddenly orphaned and becomes a naive little lost lamb. She follows the first woman to talk kindly to her to London and is shocked when this lady is like, I don't know what you do from here, you gotta figure it out, and directs her to an 18th century labor ready to place her somewhere for work. Instead of getting a more respectable job, Fanny immediately falls prey to an ongoing con at this place where a local madam, Mrs. Brown, pretends she's hiring for a companion or maidservant, but is actually looking to recruit young sex workers. At Mrs. Brown's, Fanny is assigned to share a bed with a 20-something-year-old named Phoebe and is sexually assaulted by her, but because she's not a man, Fanny just perceives it as kind of weird and not assault, so whatever, I guess. Her virginity is sold to a gross old man who tries to rape her within hours, but Fanny fights him off and gets a bloody nose and insults for her trouble. He is so mad that he comes prematurely on her legs, but she is soon rescued by another woman employed by Mrs. Brown. Fanny then falls ill for a few weeks, but the moment she recovers, Mrs. Brown is selling her virginity again. The other girls in the house regaled Fanny with tales of their exploits while she was recovering, and she and Phoebe keep having sex, so she starts to come around to the life. While lazing about the house one day, she sees Mrs. Brown getting it on with a dude. This is the first time Fanny has seen a penis, and she is so stoked that she rubs one out right then and there. She's disappointed that fingering herself hurts, so she asks Phoebe about it, and Phoebe's like, it's cool, you'll get used to it over time. You can see that sex with a penis is totally cool when Polly's John comes by tomorrow and sets her up to watch them have sex. Fanny gets so turned on by this that Phoebe has to finger her to climax while they're spying. Afterwards, they have sex again, and Fanny decides that this woman-on-woman sex is absolute bullshit, and she only has eyes for dicks now. The next morning, she happens upon a hot dude named Charles downstairs, and they fall in love at first sight, with a plan to escape the next morning and pay Mrs. Brown to free Fanny from her obligation to the house. They run away to a hotel in Chelsea and have chocolate for breakfast before they try to have sex, but Fanny's virginity door is jammed or something, and his dick is just so big, and her pussy is so tiny. Oh, heavens! Eventually, they get all the parts to work, and they're both rapturously overjoyed, having sex in the hotel for a few days. Turns out Charles is kept afloat financially by his grandmother and has plenty of money to retain Fanny as his mistress, so things are cool and chill for a bit. They get an apartment and pretend they're married. Their landlady kind of sucks, but they manage, and Fanny begins to become more refined. The more time she spends with Charles, a year goes by, and she's 3 months pregnant with their child. After Charles disappears for a few days, the landlady helps her hire someone to find him, and it is discovered that he was suddenly sent away on a complicated ship voyage by his dad as a ruse to take his inheritance from Grandma Moneybags. Grandma is so upset that she refuses to see Charles's dad and dies of sadness within a month without changing her will. Everyone loses! Fanny is so upset at hearing this that she miscarries on the spot and is ill for 6 weeks. The sketchy landlady then serves her a bill for the 6 weeks of caretaking and the rent she owes. Fanny can't pay this, and the landlady threatens to send her to debtor's prison, but, she happens to know a guy who might be able to help. Of course, this is just a pretext for someone else, yet again, to sell 16-year-old Fanny to a 40-year-old man, which the landlady does right in front of Fanny. But Fanny is too dumb and enamored by the guy's diamond ring to notice what's going on until the deal is sealed. Literally what happens.
Women be shopping.
Yeah. In fact, she is so dumbfounded and depressed that she just completely dissociates while this guy assaults her. Afterwards, he does actually seem pretty concerned and thinks she might try to unalive herself and tries to comfort her. Internally, Fanny decides to tolerate him because at least he got her out of debt, is taking care of her, and isn't mean or abusive. Fanny soon learns that her new owner, essentially, is Mr. H, brother to an earl, and he does try to woo her despite having purchased her like a piece of furniture. Kind of works, though, and Fanny is okay with the arrangement since she gets a new apartment away from her shitty landlady, and even a maid of her own, in addition to a bunch of nice clothes and jewelry. Over the next 8 months, Mr. H tries to make her happier by bringing company over and spending time with her in bed and out. Unfortunately, he just can't keep it in his pants despite having a paid mistress to fuck constantly, and Fanny catches him raping her maid. Instead of addressing this directly, she decides she's going to get her some on the side as payback, so she pursues Will, a 19-year-old that Mr. H had recently hired. Naturally, this dude is hot, a virgin, and has the biggest dick she's ever seen, so her scheme goes off splendidly. Chef's kiss. The first time they have sex, she becomes super turned on by him presumably hitting her cervix to the point of pain and bleeding, so I guess this is where that awful trope started, perhaps.
Maybe.
This only lasts a month, though, before Mr. H walks in on them during a morning fuck, and Fanny finally confronts him about having raped her maid. Mr. H banishes Will from his employ and tells Fanny she has a week to get out, and he's not doing worse on account of his own infidelity, setting this whole affair off. Will marries a nice country lass like himself 4 months later and lives happily ever after, while Fanny finds herself totally screwed once again. An acquaintance of hers, Mrs. Cole, soon offers her an upscale whoring gig in Convent Garden, which she accepts immediately. All right, here we
Excellent.
are.
Yep, that's the first half. So a little bit of background to sprinkle in before we dive into the second part. There was an extremely famous and popular book that was published in 1740 called Pamela, and it was also a quote epistolary novel. It was a huge hit, and it was about a young girl who is very naive and countrified, and she is a maid to a very rich older man, and he is constantly trying to assault her. He kidnaps her. Oh. He literally physically assaults her. And basically, she just keeps saying, no, no, no. And so the subtitle of Pamela is Virtue Rewarded, or something like that. So the long and the short of it is, after seemingly months of constant sexual assault, he's like, fine, how about we get married? And she's like, great. And so they get married and live happily ever after, which is gross. And I feel like that was also probably part of what informed Fanny's story, because there was virtue, and that whole thing was obviously a big deal at the time. And this story was about a woman who clings to her virtue through thick and thin and is rewarded at the end by getting to marry the man who was constantly assaulting her. And this was considered a happy ending. Yeah. And there were people that loved Pamela. Pamela had merch. They had, I'm serious. They were selling prints. They were selling fans. They were selling all this stuff that was related to Pamela. So much so that it got to the point that in the very human condition that we haven't changed that much, there were also anti-Pamelists. They called themselves anti-Pamelists. And I think their biggest deal was like, Pamela was faking this virtue to get what she wanted, to get with this rich guy. And they wrote parodies. One of them was called Shamala. And basically. So it's like it was this was a big deal, and Fanny Hill is obviously another sort of parody of that trope that was already a trope by the time this was published.
Okay, and again, this brings me back to Desaad once again because like in the late 18th century, in the 1790s, he wrote Justine and Juliet, and Justine's subtitle or byline, I don't know, is The Misfortunes of Virtue, and Juliet's is Vice Amply Rewarded. So he was carrying on in this in this tradition.
Pamela was a big deal. It was also, I again, please correct me, historians, but I think it was considered one of the first really English novels at all. I don't know what they were reading before that. Poems, short
pamphlets?
Stories. I don't know. Pamphlet. There was a lot of pamphlets.
Yeah.
And obviously the French were writing lots of novels, but the English just kind of didn't really get started on that until sometime later.
Cool. Well, thank you for that nice break. All right. Letter the second. Mrs. Cole advises Fanny on how to manage her independent business, as it were, and helps her find a local woman she can pretend to be a maid to in order to disguise her sex work. Luckily, Mrs. Cole is way cooler than Mrs. Brown and is truly helping Fanny rather than taking advantage of her. It is immediately apparent that this place is run professionally. Cole screens all the male clientele, and the girls are masters of their own pursuits. Mrs. Cole welcomes Fanny into the found family group of sex workers over which she presides, complete with an initiation ritual. First, all of the girls, Emily, Harriet, and Louisa, go round giving stories of their first fucks, adding more sex scenes and padding to this story that has already well outstayed its welcome at this point. Next, there is a nice dinner and dancing. Finally, everyone must take turns fucking in pairs on a couch in the center of the dining room to rid Fanny of any lingering modesty.
As one does.
Yes, as one does. Fanny is paired with a particularly lovely young man, and the ritual is complete. Huzzah. He continues to pay for access to Fanny exclusively for a month until he has to go back to Ireland, where she was supposed to follow him. But whoops, he ends up betrothed, and Fanny is back to the regular circuit. She mopes about over this loss, but soon meets her next mark, 30-year-old Mr. Norton, at the fruit market. Mrs. Cole does her usual investigation of new clients and decides the old virginity sale plan is the way and secures a handsome price and solid deal for them both. The act itself is a huge pain in the ass for Fanny, but it's successful and she becomes Norton's kept girl for a time. One day, while returning from Norton's, a random sailor kisses her in the street and she goes along with him for a fuck of her very own. Unfortunately, he catches feelings instantly and she has to escape his grasp. When she gets home, Mrs. Cole tells her that was a pretty dumbass thing to do because that dude could have given her an STI, gotten her pregnant, or hurt or killed her, and she can't be doing that shit.
Good advice,
Shortly
Mrs.
afterwards, Norton accompanies his sister on a trip and leaves Fanny a vast sum in case he doesn't come back. Which is great because he promptly fucking dies 5 days into the trip, leaving Fanny without a honeyed gentleman once more. Eventually, Mrs. Cole pairs her up with a Mr. Barville if she's interested in indulging his interest in whipping. This goes well, and Fanny enjoys her dabbling in BDSM, so Cole sets her up with more fetish clients. One day, while she's off visiting Harriet at her new lodgings, Fanny sees two dudes fuck through a peephole in the wall and insists it was just to gather evidence to convict them of the crime of sodomy, but oh rats, she fainted and they got away before she could catch them. Some point later, Louisa gets it in her mind that she wants to fuck the neighborhood boy named Dick because he's quote-unquote simple and hot. So they set a bit of a trap and Fanny watches in what may be the most disturbing scene in the entire book.
This was actually another trope of the time. People, for some reason, thought that people that had mental disabilities were super well hung and good at sex. I don't know why this was a stereotype of the time, but it was, and this is reflecting on that.
Yeah, that made me throw up in my mouth a little bit.
It's the worst part of the book by far.
Yep. Great, let's all forget that just happened. She and Emily go to a summer party sometime later where they have sex in some water with some new marks. A bit after that, Emily's parents come to collect her, and Louisa also left at some point, so Mrs. Cole decides to retire, and she and Fanny part ways. Fanny sets up in her own house and pretends to be a married woman whose husband is at sea. She helps a 60-year-old man having a respiratory attack on the road one day, which of course can only turn into more sex. This turns into a genuine relationship for 8 months, and he names Fanny his sole heir before he too promptly fucking dies 2 months later.
So convenient.
At night, I know. At 19, she is free and possesses a fair fortune, and her thoughts return to her first and only true love, Charles. She discovers that he is supposed to return to England at last, and just happens to run into him at an inn while on a trip. They have sex and marry and have 4 children and live happily ever after. The end.
One of my favorite bits of the book is at the end where Fanny, after less than 200 pages, it's not long, but like, almost 200 pages of writing about her sexual escapades to this fictional person that she's writing to, is basically like, if I have made any of this sound appealing or good, that just means that now that I'm living virtuously, I'm even more virtuous because I'm giving up the pleasures of being a sex worker to be a proper wife. As opposed to the typical morality where if a woman becomes a prostitute, she instantly sinks into misery and degradation and hates every second of it. Yep. Fanny loves every second of it. Once she gets the ball rolling, she really enjoys her job. And yet still she chooses. So she's arguing that by choosing morality at the end, it makes her even more virtuous because she's giving up something that she actually likes.
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly she's giving up independence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. All right. Let's quickly go through our little rubric here. First, we're going to talk about technical construction. All right. So how do we feel about typos, formatting, punctuation, yada yada, all that stuff?
I mean, it's this book's been around for almost 300 years. So if it had any typos, that would be pretty bad on the part of any of the editors.
That's
gone
fair.
through this. So technically it's fine. Like, the typos there's no typos. The punctuation is weird, but only because it's from the 18th century when they were allergic to periods and they just loved an entire page long sentence with a couple of commas in it. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, the disease of comma-itis definitely was very rampant at this time. And we've vaccinated over the course of centuries, but man, did they not know how to end a fucking thought?
Yeah, no.
But
so
that was
typos, formatting, punctuation. That's all fine. It's normal for its time period, and has been updated over time to be more palatable to modern audiences just a little bit. I'm sure they changed some spelling and stuff like that.
Yeah. I gotta say, not that, I mean, we've had the misfortune of reading various bits of erotica on this show, and I gotta say, this was definitely better edited and conceived than a lot of the modern versions. I mean, the run-on sentences get a little old, but whatever. Yeah, this really didn't have any problems with technical construction, I gotta say. And the cover and art direction, I mean, because this has been public domain for a long time, the covers are mostly a crime against vision, but most of them are, then the rest are just basic and fine. So there's really no one cover art. It really runs the gamut from terrible pixelated clip art to decent, the Penguin one you have looks pretty decent, I think.
It's perfectly fine. I do not think that this particular cover for this Penguin book was drawn for Fanny Hill. I'm only saying that because it shows a man and a woman in a fancy room, but there's also a little dog in the corner, and I think she would have mentioned if there was any dogs around. So I don't think that this is a painting depicting Fanny. It's just one that was in the public domain. They're like, yeah, sure, whatever. Close enough.
Yeah, they're 18th century, it's got fluffy things and lace and a dog, cool, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, so I would say technical construction, I'd give this a 1. In -1, 0, 1, this is clearly a 1, passes the bar. It books. It books, people. All right.
It does.
Plot construction. So for plot construction, I feel I don't know, for general coherence, it's got a few little coinky dinks that line up just right, and some well-timed faintings and illnesses, but it largely seems like it tracks for what the chaotic life of an impoverished teenage sex worker in England in the 18th century would be. It doesn't seem outrageous for the time period and class of the
not at
person
all
being written about.
And we get some of her inner voice and her feelings and emotions, sure, but mostly she's just describing the things that happened pretty concisely. Or not concisely, but just logically going, and then he stuck his penis in this part of my body, and then this happened. It's just
And then time passed,
crazy.
and then I saw another penis in another hole. Yeah. But But, just in terms of sort of the big movements, right? You have like a young woman in the country whose parents both die of different illnesses. Very common thing to have happened at the time, that children were constantly either dying or becoming orphaned because their family was dying. Like this was a routine thing that happened.
Right.
Not outrageous. Then she's, a naive 15-year-old who doesn't understand social stuff or like how adult life works, and it just goes to London assuming someone's going to help her, and they don't. Totally
This is
real
also
thing.
The stereotype of she's the country girl. She doesn't understand city ways.
Yeah.
She doesn't understand that people are going to try and trick her in horrible ways. Whereas this was, of course, a stereotype. People are assholes in the country too. But at the time, the country was considered idyllic, and maybe the worst that would happen to you is someone would overcharge you for a cow. Like, whereas in the city, it's just full of vice and crime and temptations.
I feel like we're lapsing back into those stereotypes now.
Yeah.
But yeah,
endured.
But she gets to the city, gets taken advantage of by a woman recruiting for young sex workers. That is totally a thing that happened and continues to happen. Like everything that, like all the sort of the major plot points don't feel absurdist. They feel totally reasonable, which I appreciated, because a lot of the time in books like this, where the main purpose is erotica, everything else that surrounds it is just sort of a tornado of nonsensical bullshit. Like that's just sort of trying to force things to happen. Whereas this actually has a scaffolding that supports the erotica rather than erotica just being thrown at the wall, right? Like you have a realistic progression.
Yeah. The point of the book is the erotica delivery. So they contained it in the most useful way, which is talking about a prostitute's life. So therefore, it's like her life is just a series of different fucks. So there you go.
Yeah, so I thought that was actually effective and relatively coherent. Obviously, the couple of things that are ridiculous is like she falls in love at first sight with Charles, and then like she happens to run into him at an inn at the end. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
England's not that small. It was pretty well populated at this time. So, it's got a little silliness, but it's not that bad. Same with like rules following, like we just said, it sets up a scaffolding that supports what it's trying to do. It's generally just trying to like cram as much sex as possible into a fake memoir, and I feel like it does that as much as it's not my thing, but he did it. And then character quality might be the thing we have the most to say about this section, I feel.
Yeah, I would say so. So just right off the bat, I mean, the thing that I actually like about this, which was probably not a conscious choice on the author, but who knows, is that Fanny is, despite everything that happens to her, she just doesn't really feel like a victim at any point. I mean, sure, she's extremely naive to the point where she is basically like conscripted into sex work, but like everything just kind of works out for her, and she pretty much loves sex like from moment one. Like we'll get to her deflowering scene, but even that scene is like with someone that she is rapturously in love with after meeting him for 2 minutes. So she's willing to like do whatever it takes to like make this assignation work. And so from her perspective, it kind of seems like the worst of her lovers was the like guy that she fake sells her virginity to, the Mr. Norton, but that's only because he can't get it up. That's her main complaint about him, is that they will start to have sex and he fails. And that's how she ends up with the sailor. Like, so she's going home from Mr. Norton's and she's so horny and worked up that she's just like, anyone, please fuck me. It's like, so when she finds the sailor and finally gets that itch scratch, she's like, oh shit, I got to get out of here. That was a bad idea. But it's like she was just so horny that, as the sailor said, any port in a storm.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I did mistakenly miss that critical part of the summary. So thank you for patching that up for me.
But I mean, she basically goes up and I don't know, he kisses her. I don't know, but basically, they happen to like go to a hotel room to have sex, and she's like all ready, and I don't even remember if he mentioned something about payment, but I think she implies that he seemed really excited to be with her and not be expected to pay, because she was just like, I need dick.
Right. Yes.
Which I also thought was very funny.
Yeah, Yeah, and I think I was also surprised. I assumed that she was just going to remain like a distressed damsel for the entire work.
Mhm.
And, it makes sense that she is at the beginning. You're 15, you live on a
Totally.
farm, you've barely met people beyond your immediate family, right? Like,
Mhm.
but she does have that evolution. And while maybe she's not, a fucking scholar or physicist by the end, like she does experience growth as a character and person. So that was appreciated. And I really appreciated that we have a story of a sex worker, and it's not the story of someone being constantly tortured and encountering a
Mhm.
cartoonish level of adversity. Because I feel like sex worker stories, it's like I feel like authors take it to a level that is just stupid in
Yeah.
order to really make it the most
The most horrible thing that
traumatic
could possibly
porn.
ever happen to
Yeah,
anybody
yeah.
ever. And
It's
it's
just
like,
trauma
honestly,
porn.
based on where she started, none of this is the worst thing that could have happened to her. Like a
Right.
15-year-old, no money, no sense of, any kind of social living on the streets of London alone, homeless, penniless. Like there are worse things that could have happened to her, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I really like about this sex worker story is that she does get a genuinely happy ending, even if in the book it's like rushed and kind of silly and not really
Yeah.
explored. Like it doesn't end. She's not what's her name from Les Miserables?
Yeah,
Fucking
Fontaine, yeah. She
Fontaine.
doesn't
Yeah,
end
she's
up
not
dead
Fontaine.
of
She's not.
syphilis. No,
Right,
she
or
she has her
pregnant
own.
with 9,000 kids, or like in the street. She like
Well, what's interesting
that's a
is you
decent
get the
ending.
yeah, you get the impression that even if she hadn't randomly run into Charles spontaneously at an inn and then lived happily ever after, if she had just remained as she was, she probably would have ended up like Mrs. Cole. Like she had savings, she'd been smart with her money, and she,
Yep.
had a nice nest egg. Maybe she would have opened her own brothel and been kind to her workers. Like that's probably what would have
Yeah.
happened if she'd never
Right.
found Charles
And
again.
exactly, and that's the other great thing about the happy ending is Charles doesn't save her. She gets to
No.
have a happy ending, and as you just pointed out, she could have had her own happy ending without him. So it's not like the hooker with a heart of gold story either. So there are
No.
just a lot of things about this story, for all of its outward appearances that are actually kind of novel in a
Yeah,
way.
she
I
k
mean,
she
especially
kinda saves him in a way. Isn't she the one with money at the end? And I don't remember if he
yeah,
ever got Grandma Moneybags money or not, but it doesn't matter
that's
because she
true.
has money. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, while the characters aren't super deep, you do spend a lot of time with Fanny. There is some introspection. You spend a lot of time in her head, and I think it works.
I will say as a quick aside, there this is like the part of the book that I like the best is that she's proactive and not a passive victim.
Mm.
Um, and it's a part that they completely destroyed in a TV miniseries that they made of this book for the BBC, I think in like
Oh.
2007. And I watched it because I'd read the book by then, but also the screenplay was written by Andrew Davies, who's like famous for adapting literature and
Who's
making it
who's
really
Andrew
good.
Dan
He
I
wrote
don't know
like
him.
Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. Like he wrote like every good
Oh,
adaptation, basically,
okay.
for TV and movies. And so I'm like, okay, great. Like I like Andrew Davies. I'm curious to see how they possibly make this into a
Yeah,
PG rated
miniseries that
TV
that
show,
I was gonna say, yeah, that could be shown on television,
right?
broadcast television. All right.
And it's like, it's pretty much the story, but they like it. Mr. Norton or whatever, or one of maybe the first guy turns out to be like a lifelong nemesis of her. At the end of
Mm.
the book, she doesn't have her own house. She does end up like penniless on the streets and gets raped by some
Oh,
rando
what?
in an alley. And as
Oh,
she's being
fuck
raped,
that.
she's like, there's inner monologue where she's narrating to herself. She's like, and it's like, even as it was happening, I had to admit that this was basically the same as my life before. I'm like, no, it freaking isn't. Like, getting paid for your services is not the same as getting raped in an alley. Like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
So I did not care for that miniseries, and I do not recommend that anybody watch it.
Oh, that's too bad. I know there were also films made. I know there was like a film in the 60s, one in the 80s. And
Yeah.
I presume there are probably others based on how long this book has been around. So I don't know how good those are, but I would guess
I haven't watched those. I couldn't
Great.
say, but it's like there's not enough drama and conflict in this book, so we need to like manufacture this situation. And I'm like, no,
there's
no,
plenty.
you don't.
There's
You
plenty
don't.
of stuff in this book. What the fuck?
It can also just be a fun sex romp where everybody is more or less having fun, and then it all ends happily. Like, why is that such a bad thing? But whatever. I won't rant too much about that miniseries.
No. I share your complaints. Not even having seen it, that sounds terrible. I am, however, learning that in addition to the 2 films I was aware of, there were a couple of other films, and then there was an off-Broadway musical in 2006, and also a comic book version. So I feel like that maybe the comic book version, the off-Broadway musical. I don't know.
I don't know about that. But the comic book version's probably pretty fun. Later, after the book was published, a series of lithographs came out depicting various scenes from Fanny Hill, which kind of added fuel to the fire for the case.
Seeing them on Wikipedia. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, they're pretty raunchy. But in a 18th century kind of way, and they actually they didn't help John Cleland's case of he really wanted people to forget this book ever existed. He did not want this book to be his legacy. So if you want to get a little bit into the author, because it'll be fun, he was in prison when this book was published. He was in debtor's prison because his best friend turned bitter enemy, Thomas Cannon, accused him of owing him 800 pounds. So he ended up in prison, and he published this book, which he had probably already written. Evidence says that he probably had already written it, and he probably revised it a bit while in prison. And he was hoping that it would kind of help clear his debt and get him out, which it did. But then it plagued him to the end of his life, and he was constantly being, brought up before the court for publishing obscene literature, basically. And
no double jeopardy back then, huh? He has to just keep going to court.
He didn't really get in trouble. He had to go through a bunch of court cases, but he didn't really get in trouble for any of it, because I'm not sure, but I think at the time publishers were actually more liable for that sort of thing than the author. So the publisher got in trouble, but he didn't really get in too much trouble. But it did kind of taint his career, which was already, as not going well since he was in prison for 2 years. But seriously. So and he never wanted to be known as the guy who wrote Fanny Hill. He wanted to have some other name for himself, but that's what he got. He tried writing other stuff. He wrote a lot of stuff, actually, but not a lot of it has survived, and no one cares about any of it.
No, I feel like that happens to a lot of creative people. We have all this output, and then it's like the thing you think no one gives a shit about becomes the thing that you are known for. And you're like, fuck, that's not the thing I like that I did. No. Yeah. Why?
Yeah, it's interesting. I read, because I am a weirdo who has to do deep dives on these pieces of nonsense. So I read a book called Fanny Hill in Bombay, which is a biography of Cleland. And the fact is, we don't know that much about him, compared to other people of the time. So we have court records and we have some other pieces of information, but he never married. He didn't leave a journal, so we can't know his innermost thoughts.
He didn't leave a journal? An author?
He didn't leave a journal. I mean,
interesting.
He probably burned it, or maybe he didn't keep one at all. Who knows?
But that is fair, yeah. Especially if he was being hounded for obscenity stuff and whatever else.
And so since he worked for the East India Company, there are some legal documents from his time there. Obviously, there's the cases of him that he was all involved in London when he got back. And he had a few family members, and they all died. So they had some, but other than that, there's just not much that we know about him. So we can just speculate. But here we go with the speculation. He never married. This man, Thomas Cannon, who put him in prison, was his best friend to the point where they were going to each other's houses every day, and they met each other's parents. But then by the time he was out of prison, they seemed to be on this path of mutually assured destruction. They were constantly suing each other and bringing each other to court in ways that didn't really help them. It's more seemed they were trying to hurt the other person more than they cared about saving themselves.
Love that.
Good best friend of confirmed bachelor turned to bitter enemies. And the last piece of evidence, beyond the Fanny Hill scene where the two men have extremely consensual, very hot sex right in front of Fanny, is
Yes.
Thomas Cannon wrote a book called, it was a pamphlet called Ancient and Modern Pederasty Investigated and Exemplified. And no copies of this exist, but they sued the hell out of him for obscenity because of this book. And a lot of it, or this pamphlet, and a lot of it was transcribed in the court records. So like we have most of it because it was in the court records.
Oh, okay.
And
that's cool.
The pamphlet is very much gay porn with a very thin veil of, oh, isn't this bad? Let me describe in detail how bad this is and not hot at all. No, totally not.
Definitely not.
Using language where he's basically what he's saying is like, yeah, he's literally saying, yeah, good for Christianity and for, denying us from doing what the ancients did, which is all this pederasty apparently. But the words he chooses to describe Christianity and the sex acts make it obvious which one he prefers. So anyway, the assumption, and we can't know for sure, but the assumption is that Cannon and Cleland were lovers and that they were both accused of sodomy several times throughout their lives. That Cannon actually fled the country, so he didn't get in trouble, and Cleland was always able to brush it off. But like even before Fanny Hill was published, Cleland was being like sideswipe kind of accused of sodomy. So it just seems like a romantic situation gone bad. And the pamphlet was published just within a few months of Fanny Hill. And the book, the Fanny Hill scene and this pamphlet are the only two 18th century descriptions of male and male sex in English literature.
Wow.
English
Seriously?
For the entire 1800s. According to this book I read. So again, but according to one source that I read, that's a lot of evidence is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so beyond the story of the book, part of the reason why I like Fanny Hill so much is that one scene in the inn where to maybe describe it in more detail, it's like her carriage breaks down. She goes in the inn. She's put in one of the rooms, alone because women can't be mingling with men. So she was in a room. She hears noises or something. She sees the men come in. She goes out of her way to find a way to spy on these.
Yes, she does.
She's like, she suspects them from the very beginning. She pokes a hole in the screen. She gets up there. She watches. And the whole time she's watching, she's like, oh, it's so horrible. It's so horrible. But the language she uses to describe it is probably the hottest in the book. Like in terms of these men, both of these beautiful, visibly disease-free men having extremely consensual intercourse, and they get away with it because she faints and therefore can't alert the authorities. So I'm like, okay, like I feel like that's an obvious play for this kind of sex is hot. Deal with it. With the thin cover of no.
I have two related thoughts. So when you were talking about Cannon's pamphlet, where it was like, Christianity is so cool. Isn't this so bad in light of all of our Christianity? It reminds me a lot of how philosophers around the same time, whenever they had an idea, had to be like, well, here's my idea. Like, for example, I think this happened with like Berkeley and his ideas on his scheme for idealism. Mm-hmm. You had to like present your idea and then be like, oh, but God was behind it all. Like, we're all an idea in the mind of God. Just so they could get published, they had to like be like, but it's all, it really all goes back to God, right? Even if they didn't really believe that. So it kind of sounds like a similar device was used here. Like, we all want to hear about the gay sex, but we can only hear about it if we talk about how good Christianity is and how evil the gay sex is. Well,
same thing happened with Galileo when he was saying that the sun is at the center of the solar system. He's like, as a fun thought experiment, let's pretend that the sun is the center of the solar system.
Yes.
So actually, I found it. I can read you the first couple of sentences of Ancient and Modern Pederasty, at least the ones that survived.
Still died alone in his house under house arrest, though, Galileo, didn't he?
But he sure did. And, Thomas Cannon didn't fare that much better. But just like, listen to like the adjectives he's using to describe each of these, as opposed to what he's actually saying. So Among the many unspeakable benefits which redound to the world from the Christian religion, no one makes a more conspicuous figure than the demolition of pederasty. That celebrated passion, sealed by sensualists, espoused by philosophers, enshrined by kings, is now exploded with one accord and disowned by the meanest beggar. I would say, wherefore fashion discountenances, law punishes, God forbids the detested love. We may present it in its studied attitude. So basically, he's like, even though in the past, smart, rich, powerful people were into this, nowadays, we totally know better. And even like the most uneducated beggar knows better. Does this kind of sound familiar?
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's like, well, he's saying, oh, it's so great that Christianity did this. He's also equating pederasty with kings and philosophers and ancient wisdom, and Christianity with beggars. So it was not subtle enough to keep him out of trouble, basically.
I also think it's very funny that these two dudes were like Cannon and Cleland or Cleland, whatever, we're trying to not like be remembered as, you know, persecuted, and now we're like, all right, let's Google these guys' names. Yes, known for gay sex. That's all they're known for. Fantastic, guys. You fucking failed. It's like all you're known for. I guess last thought the last thought I had was just how differently you know, gay sex between women and gay sex between men are treated, and this is something that, you know, still continues in its terrible tradition today. But you know, in this book in particular, sex between women is shown as almost like like friendly, silly, almost not sex, right? Like something that prepares you for real sex with a penis from a man, right? And it's very interesting to me that, you know, I'm assuming when they were brought up on charges of indecency, it was for gay male sex and not the stuff, at least in this work, and not the scenes with Fanny and Phoebe, right?
Yes, actually, in fact, another of Cannon's works was a translation of I believe it was an Italian story based on true life about a woman who she really didn't want to get married, so she dressed as a man and like went and worked somewhere where she was a man, and you know, she wore like a plastic penis or whatever, and she absconds with another woman to like marry her, and she's arrested, blah blah blah. But she is in this literature like glorified for dying a virgin, even though it's like clearly she like went after women actively. So, but like, oh, that doesn't count, and she's a wonderful, good person who never had sex with a man. So, and that's the greatest calling, I guess, is staying a virgin forever. Because when girls don't count. Anyway, also an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's an idea that takes away women's agency. It takes away their desires, their, you know, their ability to live in a world without men, right? Like it's this whole idea that, again, still, you know, dogs us all to this day. And I don't know, I just something I thought about while reading this.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying Cleland is some sort of like woke
no.
Pro like feminist or whatever. Like, because it's just how it was. He also spends pretty much most of the book talking in Fanny's voice about how hot men are and how hot all of their different parts are, and almost no time talking about how hot ladies are. He wrote another book that was called Memoirs of a Coxcomb, which is kind of like the gender swapped Fanny Hill. It didn't do nearly as well, probably because he wasn't very good at describing sex with women from the male perspective, which is probably, he didn't probably have a lot of experience with that in his own life, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that is true, because these scenes, all the sex scenes, oh boy, do they focus on the penises.
Yep. No clit is ever involved. It apparently wasn't invented in the 18th century. So reading this book is unlikely to get any modern person horny at all. So just take that off the shelf. So it's more like an interesting thought experiment.
I don't know, man. Have you met modern people? I don't know.
I mean, sure, maybe. But if you want, this might be a good time to throw in some quotes from some short readings from the book.
Well, I was going to say we should score our plot construction, and then we can move on to prose quality and dialogue. So I would give this a 0, kind of straight down the middle. I don't think it was like fantastic, but it didn't totally fail. So
yeah,
I would give it a 0.
I think that's fair.
All right. Yeah. All right, we are in agreement. And we are going to move to prose quality and dialogue. There's not, like Mary was saying earlier, there's not a whole lot of dialogue, and what there is pretty cliched, but Fanny's perspective is the important thing here, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. So in terms of prose quality, we've already talked about how this book is like dying of commitis, and it's a severe case that's on life support, but like it's written well enough. The prose is so florid. It's like more purple than the dicks they describe in the book. But that's just how things were written at the time. And also my other thought about not only just like it was the style of the time, but also when you're writing for money, usually how many words or pages you write is directly related to how much money you earn. And considering he wrote this to make money in prison, I'm assuming he was really dragging out those commas for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that didn't help the prose quality.
Yeah. All right. So Mary has selected some lovely passages from the text to read for us today. I believe you have 2, 3. What is it?
I have 2, and there is a third that we could get into if we want to get that far. But let's start with these. So I'm just going to give these as examples. They're not going to be very long. This one describes the first time Fanny has sex ever, which is with Charles, who she is completely and utterly in love with after 2 minutes. He now, too high wound up to bear a delay, he unbuttoned, and drawing out the engine of love assaults, drove it currently as at a ready-made breech. She's described earlier how she is still a virgin, so obviously virgins have sealed up vaginas, because that's just biology.
Yes, they literally talk about it like that, like there's a door.
Then, for the first time, did I feel that stiff, horn-hard gristle battering against the tender part. But imagine to yourself his surprise when he found, after several vigorous pushes, which hurt me extremely, that he made not the least impression. So Charles, in this scene, is under the impression that she has already had sex because he literally just took her from a whorehouse. So that's not it.
Right.
And she hasn't said anything about it. So right. Like, she's too wound up, but also she's like, he probably wouldn't believe me anyway. And I'm like, fair.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. This is very surprising. So that, that you kind of get the idea of it's like, it's a love assault. It's a battering ram of hard gristle. It's like not,
God.
Not her favorite, because no man in the 18th century had ever heard of foreplay. That word wasn't even invented yet. Anyway.
Yeah, seriously.
So contrast this with the scene later when they meet up again unexpectedly after she's had a couple of years of experience. And they're in the room, they're getting hot and heavy. I had now totally taken in love's true arrow from the point up to the feather, in that part where making no new wound, the lips of the original one of nature, which had owed its first breathing to this dear instrument, meaning penis, clung, as if sensible of gratitude, in eager suction around it, gross, whilst all its inwards embraced it tenderly with a warmth of gust, a compressive energy that gave it, in its way, the heartiest welcome in nature, every fiber there gathering tight round it and straining ambitiously to come in for its share of the blissful touch. Very different scenes with the same man, which kind of shows how much she has grown. Still gross, but like love's true arrow, talking about feathers, embraced it tenderly. These are much different from hard gristle and battering ram assaults.
Yeah, like God, he did a literature. He did a little bit of literature there.
He tried, bless him.
Great, thank you. All right, do we have any more examples we'd like to read from the text?
Well, mostly just, we don't need to get into the whole thing because it's kind of long. There's not really one good exemplifier, but the BDSM scene I also find very interesting because Mrs. Cole is basically like, Fanny seems up for anything. I have this friend who will pay you a shit ton of money if you let him do this BDSM stuff to you. And Fanny's like, sure, whatever, I'll try anything. I don't know. Cool. So, which is great. And so the first thing that happens in this scene is he asks her to tie him up and whip him with a big stick. And she does, and she doesn't like it. And she's like, do you really want me to keep going? You have big welts and cuts on your butt. And he's like, yes, please keep going. And so she whips him to completion. And then she's like, okay, what next? And he's like, well, if you're up for it, I want to do the same to you. And she's like, okay, sure. And he's very clear in this passage, like, you don't have to do this. Like, I'm still going to pay you. It's like, sure, I'll pay you more, but like, at no point you can say no at any time, which makes this scene better than the entirety of the 50 Shades franchise. Every word. So she's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm very, you seemed really into this, so I'm kind of curious what it feels like. So she turns around and she like puts her hands out, like for him to tie her in the same way. And he's like, why would I do that? Like, this is your first time ever doing this. I'm not going to tie you up. I want you to feel like you can get up and leave at any time. I'm like, wow, dude, 18th century dude. Like, that is some progressive shit right there, comparatively.
It's true.
And so, he beats her with a stick, and she doesn't like it, but she also doesn't cry out because she wants the full experience. She wants to know what it feels like. So he does it. They're both, and then she like is sitting down, and by sitting on her sore butt, she's like, oh, I'm getting a little tingle. Like, I don't know. Then she likes it. I don't know. And then the very funniest part of the scene is when, so then she wants to have sex because she's really turned on. But they have to find a position where he's not touching her butt because her butt hurts from the spanking. So they get into this very totally illogical Kama Sutra position that's described in detail. And and she's like, and it wasn't that bad. I probably wouldn't do it again. But, like, wow.
No, I tried it.
Better be a BDSM, like, aftercare and description than anything in 50 Shades. So we've regressed in some ways.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think you bring up another great point about the characters in this, is that it's more nuanced than I think a lot of books of this nature today, where you don't have this binary gender split where like all the women are good and all the men are evil. Like, you have some women who are tricksters and taking advantage of people. You have some women who are victims, some who are absolutely not, and some who are kind, and same with men, right? Like, you've got the rapists and, sort of misogynist type of men, lusting after young women for their virginity. And then you just kind of have, I don't know, regular dudes. And you have this guy who's like pretty cool. Charles is pretty cool. You have a nice kaleidoscope of personalities, and I don't feel like we ever really get bogged down by stereotypes, which is kind of a magnificent accomplishment considering what this is. Considering this is just like erotica, but somehow he managed to.
I would have to assume that what's that movie with Emma Stone and that weird director where she's like a zombie robot thing and has a bunch of
Pretty
sex.
Things?
Something like, or what, is it Pretty Things? Whatever. People will know what we're talking about. Anyway, it's kind of a similar plot structure to Fanny Hill, where she's like super naive, almost to the point of being a baby, has sex, loves it, and then that becomes like her sole focus for a while.
Yeah, that is true.
In broad strokes, I would kind of assume that, was it Yorgos something?
Poor Things, not Pretty Things. But, yeah, Yorgos Lanthimos,
Yeah, it kind of feels similar when you think about it.
I haven't seen it yet. I really want to see it, but now I know what I'm getting into.
Yeah, I didn't really care for it. I thought it was really boring, but it's
okay.
A lot of people really, really loved it, and I have terrible taste, obviously. So don't go by my recommendation.
Nah. I don't know. I mean, I love Emma Stone, but I don't know. We'll see. Listeners, write in.
Thematically,
like
I wouldn't. Yeah. I would be curious to find out if that was intentional or if it's just a coincidence, because it's not like not like any of these people invented the trope, not even Cleland.
Right. But, I guess I would like to read one of the things that made me laugh, and this one really got me. Let me find the best place to start this.
While you're looking at the best place to start this, I just want to give a special shout out to another of her Johns who just wants to comb her hair. And he pays her, again, an exorbitant amount of money to come to the house every day and comb her hair for an hour, and then he leaves.
Yeah, he was hair guy.
Which is pretty great. I like the representation.
Yeah, no, it was
I
good.
don't think, was there a foot guy? There's probably a foot guy. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I just there was a lot
Maybe
running
one of her
together
friends had
towards
a
the
foot
end.
guy. Oh yeah. One of her friends had a foot guy.
Ah, that's what I was thinking of. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is towards the beginning actually, where Fanny sees Mrs. Brown having sex, and this is like the first time she sees a penis or whatever. So we can get a little more of the color and flavor of the text, and some of it just made me laugh. All right. The young fellow had just dismounted when the old lady immediately sprung up with all the vigor of youth, derived no doubt from her late refreshment, and making him sit down, began in her turn to kiss him, to pat and pinch his cheeks and play with his hair, all which he received with an air of indifference and coolness that showed him to be much altered from what he was when he first went on to the breach. That was one sentence, by the way. My pious governess, however, not being above calling in auxiliaries, unlocks a little case of cordials that stood near the bed, and made him pledge her in a very plentiful dram, after which, and a little amorous parley, Madame set herself down upon the same place at the bed's foot, and the young fellow standing sidewise by her, she, with the greatest effrontery imaginable, unbuttons his breeches, and removing his shirt, draws out his affair, so shrunk and diminished that I could not but remember the difference, now crestfallen, or just faintly lifting its head, but our experienced matron, very soon, by chafing it with her hands, brought it to swell to that size and erection I had before seen it up to. Again, that was one sentence, everyone. I admired then, upon a fresh account, and with a nicer survey, the texture of that capital part of man. The flaming red head as it stood uncapped, the whiteness of the shaft, and the shrub growth of curling hair that embrowned the foots of it, the roundish bag that dangled down from it, all exacted my eager attention and renewed my flame.
Just to be clear, again, he's describing this penis in extreme detail, which he does with all the penises she encounters, and I don't think we get a single real description of a vagina. Just adding to the evidence pile. Please keep going.
No, we do not. And the roundish, the fascination with the roundish bag, quote unquote, is what really got me in that section. But yeah, like we never hear anything about vaginas except for how they are shut up and virginal or how they hurt. That's it.
Just moist passage. I mean, very basic stuff. Even her boobs are just described as my like lily soft breast or whatever. I mean, it very perfunctory. But when it comes to the men, extreme granular detail.
Oh yeah, yep. Actually, we can get to the gay sex scene if I can find it.
It's on from our Gmail page. It's page 93.
Ah, damn! I scrolled right by it. Okay.
So yeah, I can lead us in and then pick us up.
Oh sure, if you wouldn't mind.
So yeah, the peephole scene is definitely worth describing as well. We'll just give a little brief detail. So the players, we've got Fanny standing on one side of this partition that is very thin. The two men, the eldest might be, on my nearest guess, towards 19, a tall, comely young man in a white fustian frock with a green velvet cape, a cut bob wig. The youngest could not be above 17, fair, ruddy, completely well-made, and to say the truth, a sweet, pretty stripling. So, like, both these men, very hot.
Yes. I can continue a little bit more. He was, too, I fancy, a country lad by his dress, which was a green plush frock and breeches of the same, white waistcoat and stockings, a jockey cap with his yellowish hair long and loose in natural curls. But after a look of circumspection, which I saw the eldest cast every way round the room, probably in too much hurry and heat not to overlook the very small opening I was posted at, especially at the height it was, whilst my eye close to it kept the light from shining through and betraying it, he said something to his companion that presently changed the face of things.
And this is kind of, this gets into Fanny's complete inability to even envision gay sex. So it's kind of propped up earlier in the text where she's like, what? How can men have sex? You can't put anything in there. So, and so at this point she says, for now the elder beginning to embrace, to press and kiss the younger, to put his hands onto his bosom and give him such manifest signs of an amorous intention as made me conclude that the other is a girl in disguise. Like, that's the only possible explanation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, anyway, and then we spend so much time talking about how they undress each other. Like, There is so much more detail in all the other scenes where it's like a man and a woman, or even when it's Fanny and Phoebe. The undressing is like one sentence. It's like, I don't know, they took their pants off. This is like a paragraph or two of unbuttoning.
Yeah, it goes on for a while. One of my favorite little sections here. Okay, they're they got each other's clothes off. The older is starting to like get all up in the other one's butt and says, let's see. At length, the first straits of entrance being pretty well go through, everything seemed to move and go pretty currently on, as on a carpet road being a vagina. That's the descriptions we get.
Which carpet road. I've never heard that one.
Woof. Anyway, without much rubber resistance, and now passing one hand around his minion's hips, he got hold of his red-topped ivory toy that stood perfectly stiff and showed that he was like his mother behind, he was like his father before. So it just very clearly, like from her naive description, showing that they are both super into what is going on right now. I think I feel like a lot of the rhetoric around pederasty at the time was like older men inflicting themselves on young boys, and like that's why sending boys to school is dangerous because you never know which professor is going to like go. And I'm like, I'm sure that was probably happening because people are gross, but the fact that this is described so eloquently as a consensual act, I think, is important
between two young men, ostensibly.
Between two young men, yeah, right? Not like some guy who's like in his 40s and like a young boy who looks like a girl. It's like two kind of similarly aged dudes who have clothes and money enough to stop at an inn and their own carriage and like, no visible. I think she says some point earlier, it's like, I couldn't tell from looking at them that this was something they'd be. And like, yeah, you can't tell from looking at them. Anyway.
Yeah, right. Oh, right. And then it ends with her, the gossamer covering of the criminal scene they acted. I had the patience to see to an end, purely that I might gather more facts and certainty against them in my design to do their deserts instant justice. And accordingly, when they had readjusted themselves and were preparing to go out, burning as I was with rage and indignation, I jumped down from the chair in order to raise the house upon them, but with such an unlucky impetuosity that some nail or ruggedness in the floor caught my foot and flung me on my face with such violence that I fell senseless on the ground and lay there some time before anyone came to my relief. So that they, alarmed, I suppose, by the noise of my fall, had more than the necessary time to make a safe retreat. This they effected, as I learnt, with a precipitation nobody could account for, until, when come to myself and composed enough to speak, I acquainted those of the house with the whole transaction I had been evidence to. So that's her whole, oh no, I fell and fainted.
Oh, no.
Like, okay. Oh,
and then she gets home to Mrs. Cole and tells her all about it, and Mrs. Cole's like, don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's fuck off, Fanny. It's
like this. Don't worry about it. It'll be. I'm sure they'll get caught sooner or later. Whatever. Like, don't just leave it alone. Yeah.
Cleland's like sighing as he writes the scene. Like, oh god damn
it. Yep.
All right. So, for prose, quality, and dialogue, I feel like this is 0. It's down the middle. It does what it's supposed to do. It's not great, but it's pretty okay. Even does a little literature from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the era, really, I've read worse. I've read harder to read things from the same time period. So,
yeah, for real, me too. All right, Terriblo's presence. I feel like Terriblo was not here. I did not hear or feel any tentacles. This was pretty straightforward. Nothing was like, like we said earlier, it was pretty coherent. It doesn't feel too ridiculous. So I'd give this a 1. I don't think there was any otherworldly, chaotic presence.
Nope, it was very naturalistic, more or less. I mean, not naturalistic in terms of describing the female body, which he doesn't, has never seen. But definitely not bad.
Yeah. No terrible cosmic horrors this time around, which was a pleasant surprise. All right. Should this exist? Now, we have a few questions under this heading to come to our determination. Would readers of this genre enjoy this?
Depends on what genre they're hoping to find.
So,
if you're a fan of modern erotic literature, no, you would not enjoy this at all. These are not hot sex scenes. No one's going to get jollies off of this unless, I guess, never say
unless
never.
That's your thing. That's your
That's the
thing, I
thing.
guess.
It's just they're very poetically described, but not realistic sex scenes.
Yeah. I feel like if you're like deeply into erotica, this might be worth reading for the historical aspect, or if
Absolutely.
you're interested in, as Mary and I discussed earlier, sort of the history of sex of this period of time, sure. And maybe you'll learn some archaic synonyms for body parts in sex terms or something. We've got our ivory toys and our mother behind, father in front, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun stuff.
And it's short. It's not a long book.
No, it was 176 pages.
Something like that, yeah.
Under 200, point being. So I don't know. Would readers of the show, this is like a maybe for me. It's not really a yes or no.
Yeah.
Do we feel as if the author's goal was met? Hell yeah, he made his money. Although, I don't know, it did kind of like haunt him for the rest of his life. So.
Yeah, again, it depends on which goal. Like the goal to get out of prison, sure. But the goal to become a famous writer, or if he had that goal, I guess technically, but not for the right reasons.
Do we know if the proceeds from this did actually help him get out of debtor's prison, or
we don't know that for sure? No. I mean, it was more debtor's prison is weird, and like the legal records that exist are like not as clear as they seem like they should be, considering its dollar amounts involved, but
yeah, right.
It's unlikely that this debt even really existed, or at least if it did, not to the extent that he claims it did, because it's unlikely that Thomas Cannon had 800 pounds to lend. Like, so that that was an insane amount of money for either of them. Like, they were gentlemen, but they weren't rich by any means. And so it's unlikely that he actually loaned Cleland 800 pounds. And so maybe they just kind of settled. I don't know.
Yeah. Huh. Wild. All right. Does this add anything new, interesting, or novel? I mean, I think at the time, absolutely. In 2025, I feel like before we talked, I was like, nah, this is old hat. But now I'm like, I don't know. I feel like it does some stuff that modern erotica doesn't. And it to its credit,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, he obviously never once made a woman orgasm in his life, or at least not before writing this book. But it still deals with it more compassionately than you would expect.
Yeah.
So, and this is something that did crop up in some of his legal cases. So he had 2 cases when he was in Bombay, where he seemed to be championing the underdog, because it was his job, but also he was very zealous at doing the job. So one was, there was a local merchant, so an Indian man, who was owed money by a British guy, and the British guy was like, basically, fuck you, I'm going to take off. Like, and, I'm a colonizer, so I'm never going to have to deal with this. And Cleland represented the merchant and eventually got him his money. And so, and it wasn't just that he represented him, because like someone had to, because like legally he did have rights, but it was that he represented him so passionately. Like, he really went out of his way to like try and get this guy the money that he was owed. And in another instance, a woman who was either a servant or a slave, and that legal distinction is really important, came to him from another colonizer and was like, I want to be away from this guy. He's abusive. And so Cleland represented her. And the whole legal argument was, is she a slave or is she free? Because if she was a slave, she had no rights, and then the case wouldn't even be heard. But if she was free, she would have rights, and the case could be heard. So he was arguing that they had a written or verbal agreement that she was freed. And that's where it get into the nitty gritty of the legal. But he really stuck his neck out for this woman, against someone who was richer and more powerful than he was. So
cool.
I'm again not claiming he was a good person. He was still very much a colonizer himself. But
yeah,
it just instances where he does have compassion for people that probably his fellow Briton wouldn't have had a lot of compassion for.
Yeah, and I think, and it feels like that's reflected in his writing. So it's kind of interesting to see that we have evidence of that in his life, that, who he was as an author wasn't seemingly too far from who he was, as a person. All right. Did this take something from us? I'd say nah. It was pretty short, and I could just like gracefully slip into a coma for pages at a time and just scroll by the sex
very
scenes.
skimmable.
Yes,
very skimmable.
Very skimmable. What should someone read instead of this? I mean, I I would probably, I mean, if this is take this recommendation with like, a slant. This is on a scale, or grading on a scale here. Or excuse me, grading on a curve here, or recommending on a curve is what I'm trying to say. Like Justine and Juliet from the 1790s by the Marquis de Sade. If you're looking for something like this, but with more depth and development, I will caution that those are both more challenging in their content in many ways, though, because we get into a lot more deeper philosophical ideas and more aggressive confrontations with ideas of like morality and gender and sex and everything. The de Sade can be a bit of a rough read for some people, but I don't know. I feel like I was glad I read those books. They definitely gave me, I think, a different perspective. I mean, I read them a very long time ago. We're talking like 20 years ago now, but yeah, I think if you were like, okay, this sounds cool, but I want something with more depth that's more serious, then maybe go that route. But I'm not familiar enough with other texts like this of that time, so I don't know that I have like any other recommendations.
That's fair. I mean, I'm no expert at texts of this time. I guess if you were really curious about this topic and wanted to do a deep dive, I would honestly just say go ahead and read Fanny Hill. The biography I read called Fanny Hill in Bombay was also pretty good. I did skim parts of it, and if you really, really wanted to go in, you could read Pamela and you could read Shamala.
Oh, right.
But with the caveat that from the analysis I've read, they are boring as hell. Like, despite the horrible subject material, like so friggin' boring. I mean, reading about a virtuous person being virtuous is just not, and who is constantly under attack, is just not a pleasant thing to read. Whereas, and it's also I think it's really long, so that doesn't help. But Fanny Hill is not unpleasant to read. And there were other books of the time about, I want to say Clarissa or The Mill on the Floss. Like there's books about virtuous women being brought low by sexual escapades of various stripes. Those are a dime a dozen. So you can find, if you're really curious, you can find them. But I think Fanny Hill is more fun.
Yeah, for real. Cool. All right. Well, based on all of that, should this exist? Where do we fall on that?
I mean, sure. It's nowadays it's really not hurting anybody. Although it perpetuates some really gross stereotypes. It's, it's 1740. I don't know. What do you want from me?
yeah, really.
So as far as should it exist? Sure. I mean, there's been some interesting scholarship on it. More interesting than the book itself, probably. So if you have gotten the idea for this book and you feel like you've got a good grasp on it from what we've said, but you're still curious, like go find anything on Google Scholar that anyone's ever written about it. Because people go off. Like they use this as a jumping point for all kinds of crazy academic theories, which are pretty fun, but probably not intended by the author.
Yeah, I feel like I want to give this a 1 for existing because sure, it has its problems, but there's so much in it that's like
not as bad as you'd think. Not as bad as you think.
Yeah, I guess I would use the word progressive for its time, and just the fact that like had this not been written, we actually would not apparently have anything in the English language to go on from this time. So it is quite important in that way.
I guess when you think about it, the only reason that people know about Thomas Cannon's pamphlet about pederasty is because of Fanny Hill and scholarship that's been done on John Cleland's life. Because again, all copies of it have been expunged. The only text they have of it is from the legal records, which no one would have bothered really diving into if they weren't looking for information about this much more famous thing. Like it's very likely it would have been completely forgotten and erased if it wasn't for Fanny Hill. So that's it. Like those are the 2 homosexual writings we have from the 18th century in English language, and it's it's because of the one being remembered.
Yeah. So great. So I think for scores, we've got a 3 out of 5. That's pretty high for what I came into this thinking this would be. I would say it's certainly booked. It booked plus. I don't know. That was I gotta say, like, as much as I didn't like love the experience of reading it. Like, it's not something I would return to or probably really recommend to someone, but I like the historical context and what I learned from it. And I don't know, I feel like it gave me a more nuanced view of something like this from the time. Because, like, I would definitely expect this to be way, I would expect this to fall into all the tropes we already discussed. And the fact that it doesn't really challenges kind of my perception, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Yeah.
I love personally reading original writings from different eras that are not important writings. You know what I mean? Because I feel like they give this weird snapshot into aspects of human life at the time that we don't think about when we're reading like a history book. So, like, for example, I like to collect brochures and other like ephemera from the era when people were still taking big boat tours of Europe. So like they'd get on a cruise and they'd do Europe and they'd do upper Africa. And the pamphlets from these would be like, Princess Cruises 1921 dossier of where all the ports were going to stop at in 1921 cruise. And they describe the areas and they describe the people in it in extremely racist language. Do not get me wrong. These are not
dear.
I mean, they're marketing materials for cruises from like the 20s and 30s. So they're written to white people who are spending money on cruises in the 20s and 30s. So
yeah, right.
But I find them interesting because it's a sort of ephemera that everyday people would have like been interested in and read and would have formed their opinions more so than like some piece of great literature from the time, which maybe they read, maybe they discussed, but like wasn't a part of their everyday thinking like a brochure would be,
Yeah. No,
so anyway, this falls into that category for me because it's light entertainment that made a big splash because of all the sex in it, but it wasn't like, it's not considered great literature. It was just this thing that happened to blow up because of all the obscenity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that history is full of regular ass people like you and me and our listeners. And there's so much focus on people that are quote unquote considered important and often categorized that way by people who come after them. And so, it is good to remember, the epistolary novels about a whore's life because that gives you a more realistic, view of things.
Absolutely. And the important people at the time whose major writings are like remembered or whatever probably had political stake in condemning people like Fanny. And so a lot of that stuff that survives is like, laws and legal writings and books like Pamela. So it is interesting to see this written as like, no, she's not that bad. And she does her job. Her clients are just people. Like, yep.
Yeah. All right. Before we close out, do we think we could fix this in any way? Is there anything we would change?
The more I think about it, I would love to hear like a modern retelling of Fanny Hill about someone who kind of falls into sex work and ends up being good at it and loving it and having a happy life at the end. And I'm sure there are books like that exist, but even today, it's more books about people falling into drugs and they're this and that, and it's all dark and sad. And it's like, there are people out there making normal livings and living normal lives, doing all kinds of different sex work. I would like to hear about them, like the 9 to 5 punching the clock of
especially
saving money, being smart. Yeah.
Especially with the advent of virtual sex work, I just feel like those people are even more common. I mean, for me, I feel like there are a couple of changes I would request. So one, Jesus Christ, the addition of all the sex scenes in the latter half was really unnecessary. And I was in space. I couldn't pay attention. Yeah, I think if he cut the initiation sex scenes, the one where they're at like a house party in the summer in a pool, and the one with the kid, the quote unquote simple boy named Dick, Jesus Christ.
Cut that.
It would be way improved. And the second thing I would really like would be for the end, like all that falling action. I really want that to be expanded upon. It seems so like perfunctory. It's just like, I don't know. She sort of went retired and had money and then met Charles and got married at the end. It literally happens in like 2 paragraphs. Like it's not developed at all. So
I would have loved to have her pick up a girl that was like in the same position as she was and like set her up nicely before the Charles stuff happens. That would have been a nice sort of like denouement. Like probably not like get a girl off the street like was done to her, but like a girl who's starting out in sex work.
Yeah, right.
And like be like, and maybe she's in a terrible brothel and Fanny to like save her and show her the correct way of doing the job and like get her set up on the right path. And then like, that would make a nice little like bow on her story.
And for her to either hire like a private investigator and find Charles or something rather than like we just ran into each other at an inn in some random ass town. Like
she was like planning on doing that. She's like, I have money. I'm going to hire investigators, and it sounds like he's going to be back in England in a couple months, and then I'm really going to ramp up my search. Oh, there he is. Hey, what's up, buddy? It's like
it was just very like not really developed. All right, cool. I don't know. Did you have any other fun facts to share from the Fanny Hill in Bombay? Because it sounded like that book was pretty interesting, and I know you've already shared a lot. But if there's anything else you have,
I guess just one quick fun fact that wasn't really worth bringing up. But so he was in the part of the East India Company. He came back to England from Bombay when his father was dying to like deal with wrapping all that up.
The estate stuff.
For some reason, he didn't go back to Bombay, and he seemed to be feeling quite bitter at the time. So he he met up with this guy and ended up going to Portugal and meeting with some of the top advisors of the King of Portugal to try and convince him to set up a competing company to the East India Company. So, because Portugal was like thinking about it, like East India Company kind of had a world monopoly, and he was like, "Hey,
they sure did.
I know their inner workings. I was like a career bureaucrat. I can like help you with the details of how to set up a company like this." So he like kind of did some espionage, which he never seemed to get in trouble for. Like he never got in trouble.
They were too worried about the dicks touching. It was too much of a problem.
I don't know if they just didn't know. They might not have known.
Maybe.
He might not have gotten caught in his lifetime. This was all like revealed later from other documents. But I just thought that was really interesting. He was like, apparently at some point he was so bitter against the East India Company and against Britain that he was willing to like do a little espionage shenanigans. Read into that what you will.
Yeah, seems like he was maybe like, cooler than the average British gentleman of the time.
Yeah, it didn't do him any favors, though. I mean, he did live to an old age and he had a house, I mean, he was like, by most standards, fine, but he was also very bitter. He very upset that none of his other writings really took off the way Fanny Hill did. No one really came to visit him. He wasn't popular. So, but there are worse fates in the 18th century than dying alone in a house that you own.
Yeah, not so bad, all things considered.
No.
All right. Well, thank you for that kind of fun and enlightening discussion, Mary. I'm glad you were here today. Yeah, I don't know. Did you have any things to share? Like, can people find you places? Do you have upcoming creative things people should go to see, perhaps, or check out?
Nope, nothing to promote of my own. I guess the one last thing that I almost forgot to mention was that this book was censored until I believe 1963. And it was only available in a sort of expunged version, which I don't understand how that is possible because that would make it about 5 pages long. But yeah, there is an expurgated version that is the only one that was available until 1963. Which I got to track that down and actually read it because I'm like, what could possibly be left? It's just
like,
sex scenes. It's like, why bother?
Hi, I was 15 and I moved to London and then I
met Charles. The end.
And then and it's like, whoa, that's very funny. I wonder if it's just blacked
don't
out.
Worry about it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to because like literally it's got to be like 20 pages long. Like there's nothing. Or maybe
I feel like
maybe they just glossed over or just like. I don't know.
And then they went into a room and closed the door. Anyway, so the next day, it's probably
so I just thought that was also kind of funny.
Wow, that's a long time. Cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, if you don't want people to find you, that's fine, Mary. You may continue to be hidden away.
I'm very mysterious.
But Yes, but thank you for being here again. We always love having you on the show, and hopefully we'll find another reason to bring you back either in a few months or next year, since since we seem to only find like once a year slots, but maybe it'll be another one. We'll see. All right. Well, I guess with that, I will close us out and thank our patrons and coffee donors or Ko-fi donors because we can never say it right. Thank you to our bad bookworms, Ben, Donnie, Emily, Yakub, Jared, Scott, and Will, our exacting editors, Kieran, David, D, Emmy, Funny Robot with Antennas, Greg, Harry7, Martin, Root Beer Cutie, The Ugly One, Elliot, and Xander. Our loathsome librarians, Veronica, Beast with the Least, Yanka, Luchek, Patricia, Julius, and of the Void, the taco-eating unicorn of the Hot Springs. Still eating tacos, still in the Hot Springs, very good. Our pesky publishers, Miles, Austin, Patrick, Fred, and our newest addition, George. Welcome, George, to our pesky publishers. We look forward to reading whatever horrible thing you are going to make us read in the next couple months. And our coffee donors, Mark, Tracy, our ever faithful Kiwi thing, and Excavating Lizard, along with Martin F., Brenna, and Matthew, who relieved us of terrible books this past year. If you, too, would like some terrible books that we have read for the show, physical books, you can buy them over on our coffee page. We'll even sign them and dedicate them to you if you wish. They come with bookmarks. It's a great deal. There's free shipping. Please buy the books and take them from my home. They are taking up space in my house. Thank you. All right, great. With that, I suppose we will see you in 2 weeks. Hopefully we will have pulled Chris off the boat by then. But thank you, Mary, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Terrible Book Club. Terrible Book Club is an independent podcast produced by your hosts, Paris and Chris. Sound design and audio editing by Chris, with sound effects and music by Epidemic Sound and sometimes also Chris. Our theme song is Kiss by Yearn, which is, you guessed it, actually also Chris. You can find more of his soothing synthy sounds on Bandcamp at yearn.bandcamp.com. Do you want us to review a book of your choice on the show? Do you want access to some extra audio-visual weirdness? If so, become a patron at patreon.com/terriblebookclub. If you'd like to send us a one-time tip instead, you can do that at ko-fi.com/terriblebookclub. You can also support TBC for free by sharing the show on social media, following our accounts on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Goodreads, telling your friends about your favorite episode, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or anywhere else on the internet. To send us book recommendations or your adorable pet photos, send an email to terriblebookclub@gmail.com.